can see the games that are on the retro NAS, but they show up in the menu on the PlayStation. So when you go to select them, they mount like you just put a disc in, but it's over the network on a console from 2006. And so like things like that's pretty neat. They have a ROM import tool that uses a guy, Smoke Monster, puts together a huge database of basically every game in existence. So, but instead of matching the games through the naming convention, because different people name their stuff differently, it actually does it based on like a fingerprint of the file itself. And so you can just throw all your ROMs into this ROM import folder, and the tool goes through and like checks basically the signature of the file and sorts it into the right system folders and stuff in your thing. So you don't have to meticulously organize them. You throw them all in there and it just reads all of your files and puts them, these are Atari, these are Nintendo, these
Oh,
are
wow.
Sony, these are whatever.
That's crazy.
And so it just organizes all your stuff really well. And it organizes it not just in the system, but when you go in, it's like, games A through F and G through
Oh,
whatever. And
wow.
like
That's
these are,
nice.
the games that were like Nintendo Power's top 10 in 1994, and like all these different
Oh,
playlist
that's
things you can
cool.
go through. So like there's a lot of really cool things with that ROM import tool, and there's a bunch more functionality in there. But it's nice that I have that one central repository of all of my retro, games, ROMs, ISOs, etc. Because if I decide to change devices, so like I was testing a Recal box on another Pi, and it works for almost everything, but I wanted to try out some Sega Saturn stuff, and that didn't quite work out. But my Nvidia Shield TV Pro in the living room plays it no problem. So instead of having to like, well, I copied everything to the Recal box SD card, now I gotta copy everything over here. It's just in this one place. So I can go to different devices, whether it be my PS3, my hacked Wii U, my Recal box or some Shield, and they're all the games are in a central place. I don't have to worry about having a bunch of
Wow.
copies of them. And all it is a Pi 4 and external like 4 terabyte USB drive plugged in, and it works great.
So in order um for the files to be performant, I mean for like the read speed of the network would just have to basically match the read speed of a CD-ROM device,
Yeah,
right?
of the Blu-ray drive,
The
yeah, and
Blu-ray, yeah.
it's really not as fast as you think it would be.
Okay. So
I
you haven't
think
noticed any kind of latency or stutters
um,
or anything like that? Oh, no,
let
I
me
was
see
just
what that
curious. I mean,
actually comes out. So the 8x is the max speed on the PS3, and that's about 288 megabits.
okay.
So you could do it over Wi-Fi if you have fast enough
So
Wi-Fi, but
you are doing it over
yeah,
Ethernet
it's
then?
over Ethernet. Yeah,
Okay.
I have Ethernet run in the attic and stuff to the different rooms,
Gotcha.
but yeah, and so over Ethernet, there's like no issue at all, right? Like it streams off the disc, like even games that normally play off the disc, not the ones that install to the PS3 itself.
Hmm.
You can actually just play them as if they're playing off the disc over the network. It's actually really impressive.
Well, and I'll tell you what, the sorting features that I've looked at, some of the retro gaming and stuff, and you just get hundreds of loose files, and you just have to kind of figure out like,
Yeah.
if there's no real rhyme or reason, and some people have different naming conventions, and like it can be messy. So it's nice that there's the auto sorting and like grouping and
Mhm.
playlists, and that's really a very clever way to do that. Yeah.
So for managing it, they have all of their stuff is in a specific tool that uses like a incurses type, you know, quasi graphical thing, right? But you can choose to SSH into it directly and stuff because they enable the SSH server. But there's also an option to install Cockpit if you're familiar with that. It's like a web-based Linux server management thing that Red Hat came up with. I've used it a couple times. It's pretty neat, but I've never actually like put it together with any kind of, I don't know, decency. So they actually have like a lot of stuff. And so you have a web GUI where you can manage your storage. So you can mount e- external storage or add stuff to it. You can connect NFS, manage networking stuff, but also like have a terminal in the web that you can then access your retro NAS stuff from, and various other like sensors and things you might have on. Or it's pretty neat. Like it's really awesome that the guy is put into, and it's still technically in an alpha state or whatever, but it's very usable, and he's always adding more and more stuff to it. I love it. Let me see if I can get exactly who the guy is.
Yeah, if you have a link, we can stick that in the chat. That would be great. Yeah, the idea that you can use multiple devices too, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and yeah, because like it's like a NAS, it would be like a centralized.
Right.
Um, it's Dan Mons is the guy that made it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like a centralized place for all of your retro stuff to exist, and they also have support for other devices that not just like I have the hacked PS3 there, but they also have support for like old computer stuff, like old Apple Mac or Amiga and other things
Wow.
like that, Commodore, MS-DOS games. Like you can store those on there. They have stuff for specific devices like hardware mods. Like if you have, say, the GC loader is a thing I have in my GameCube that allows me to load GameCube games from an SD card. But if you have the broadband adapter for the GameCube, you can connect it to the network. And so then you could store your GameCube games on the retro NAS and access them over the network through your GC loader in your GameCube. So you're still using official hardware with the original controller and everything, but
Yeah.
you can access your stuff over the network.
Wait, you
And
can you can hook a GameCube to the network?
yeah, if you have a broadband adapter. Yeah.
What? I missed that. We have a GameCube.
You'd have to get some stuff. It wouldn't it's not as simple as you think, but I mean, like you can connect it to online or what, like through the broadband adapter, but to run like homebrew stuff, you gotta have like an SD2 it's like so I think I can't remember what it's called, like SD2 SEP or something like that, or a GC loader or something like that. It's like a hardware mod inside too. The GC loader is really easy. It's like very plug and play, but it's like $90. So you gotta really want your GameCube to work.
That's awesome though.
Yeah, I love my GC loader. It's awesome.
I love the idea that there's always a way, you know.
Yeah, someone's gonna find it. Yeah.
Right. There's some kind of workaround out there. Someone just needs to put their mind to it. It's amazing.
So put the link in the Zoom chat if you want to paste that elsewhere.
That's awesome.
Retro NAS project.
Nice.
But there's so much to like retro gaming stuff that most people probably wouldn't think about beyond emulators. And most people probably think of just I'll just run in an emulator, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't see anything wrong with running an emulator. But if you have the original hardware, there's so many ways to play on the original hardware that can improve things.
Mm-hmm.
So they have flash carts is one thing where you can basically get a cartridge for your system, whether it be Nintendo, Sega, whatever, and put an SD card in that, and it will play ROMs on the original hardware. Or the similar thing for a disc-based game would be an ODE or optical drive emulator, which is what the GC loader does. So you take out the physical like GameCube disc reader, and then you replace it with this like circuit board, and it has an SD card slot and stuff on it, and it basically acts as the optical drive for the device, but it's not an optical drive.
Hearing you talk about this reminds me of using a virtual optical disc where you would
like Daemon tools.
Yeah, where you basically rip the ISO, and then that way you wouldn't have to put the CD in every damn time.
It's actually the similar thing, because especially the thing about the optical drive emulators, I think they solve a crucial problem in that a lot of these disc readers, they go out, man. They even went out when they were new, like
right.
They're not like they're pretty fragile things, and if you can preserve your disc reader, or maybe just keep your console going longer because you can replace the disc reader with something else.
Yeah.
And awesome, right? Because I mean, think about it. How many people back in the day, it's like, oh, my PlayStation stopped reading discs, throw it away,
Yeah.
But now you can get like a mode or a PSIO or something, and replace your optical drive.
A buddy of mine gave me his original fat PS3. He bought it brand new, $600 but he gave it to me because the disk drive burned out on it, and
yeah,
I tried my hand at the original custom firmware. I think it was some GeoHot era stuff, and I ended up crashing it.
A lot more difficult, yeah.
So since there's a piece of software that I've been trying to find, and I can't figure out whether or not I can't for the life of me remember what it was, but there were games when they stopped. Like the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 were the last consoles I can remember that had local network capability. And there's a piece of software you could run on your PC and run
X-Link Kai.
X-Link Kai. That's it.
Yeah.
Is that still around? Do people still use that?
Yeah. People use it for OG Xbox stuff a lot. Like they'll use it for playing OG Xbox games. Like before because the original Xbox had the LAN adapter built in, and they'll play older Xbox Live games using Xlink Kai. So like the servers have long shut down, but people still play them online with each other with that. Yeah.
Right, because your PC emulates a network over
Yeah, I
with
think people are
them.
still doing that with PS2 as well, like SOCOM and stuff like that. But
Wow. There was actually a Linux install for PS2. It was an educational
yeah, I remember that.
pack that you could put together.
And there's even some stuff for like PS2 is a fairly locked down console altogether, but there are things like free boot, which are it's a homebrew thing that you store on the memory card. You various ways to install it, but you can get like on a PS2 memory card the free boot thing that boots the custom kind of homebrew firmware of a sort, and then you can load games across the network or read burned disks or just run like things that are homebrew, like stuff people created that weren't officially licensed and sold through Sony and all that. So you can people who just make basically indie games, you can run those on your PS2 and you don't have to have an official disc or anything.
I remember a kid that I went to high school with. He had PC before I did and was beta testing things and whatnot. The first time I realized you could hook a PS2 to the internet, he was beta testing the Final Fantasy online. He was like, bro,
11,
I can't,
yeah.
he's like, you can't tell anybody about this. I am not, this is NDA and everything, but it's cool. You got to check this out. I was like, what? You're playing Final Fantasy? What? This isn't even in like, it hadn't even been like announced officially, or maybe it had been, but nobody was allowed to talk about it yet. I was like, how did you get this? It was pretty cool. Like, it was like that PS2. There are a lot of systems like that, and that had extra features that were lesser known. The Sega Genesis had a Sega Online feature you could get early on.
The Super Nintendo in Japan had Satellaview, which was like a satellite service that you could download games to a cartridge in your Super Nintendo. Yeah, stuff like that existed, but so few people had it, and like so few people used it. The Satellaview was fairly popular, and Sega Channel was one of those. Yeah, and like they existed, but yeah, they were not nearly as popular as people thought. And it wasn't until like the OG Xbox that like online console playing was really like became a real thing. I mean, some people played online, on PS2, like Final Fantasy 11, SOCOM, etc. And the Dreamcast definitely, right? That had the modem and stuff. But yeah, it's
Fantasy
good and
Star.
bad, because like now one of the bummers, at least to me, is that things like couch co-op is so hard to find in games now, like because everybody plays on their own machine, that couch co-op stuff and split screen and all that's just not even consideration now. And I get that most people, I guess, would rather play online, which is more convenient for them. But playing, like Nessa and I were playing Mario Kart Double Dash on the GameCube, and it's like, man, just playing like sitting next to each other and laughing and having a good time, online doesn't replace that. It doesn't.
No.
That's one thing I like about the Switch is friends come over and they'll bring Mario Kart, Smash Brothers, or Mario Party that we play, and we just have a great time. And you can only fit four, like even though the console can probably handle a bunch of players, Mario Party is still 4-player only, so you have to take turns and you have like a bunch of people. It's fun.
Yeah, Nintendo's really the only one that seems to care about that anymore. PlayStation and Xbox are gone, and PC has always been a very personal thing, right? Like there are very few times where you have PC games that had people sitting next to each other, right?
Right. It would be a LAN party where you're literally sitting across the table from each other, but you're on your own device. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Sometimes we'll do Soul Calibur because it's PC, and we'll sit here at this. It's kind of fun. We have with Rocket League, we can play on the big TV behind me. You can see my son's playing right now, but we can do Rocket League there on split screen if we want to, or we can do it where I'm sitting here at the PC and he's over there, or he's on the Switch. But we're all staying in the same room. I do like the fact that we can do that. My only gripe is that we don't have local. There's no longer do we have the LAN capability of the systems where it's just here. You have to connect through an external network. And if it's on Xbox, you have to have Xbox Live to do those things. So if we want to play Minecraft, then we have to do it that way. We have to somebody on Xbox has to have a live connection or
Yeah,
a subscription.
correct. Yeah. And I don't know, it can be frustrating, but at the same time, like that's what people want, right? Just think of I grew up with siblings, but there are many kids that, especially now, people have less kids, and if you're the only kid, like, man, it's like, yay, couch co-op with no one else on the couch, like,
Right.
that'd be a different experience.
Yep. I remember playing lots of games like that. Yeah. It was either up, down, split top and bottom, or split left, right. Yeah. And it was always just fun because it's almost like it's less about the game and more about the interaction that you're having. Like you said, just sitting and laughing, and the fact that it's a shared experience versus even if you're in the same room and if you're on a different device, it's still, you're on your own, you feel like you're on your own, I guess, more.
Yeah.
And honestly, I know people have complained about split screens, and you're the way you focus on it when you're playing, it doesn't really matter that it's a split screen. You adjust, and you just, I don't know. I never had a problem doing that, honestly. So, but I know a lot of people, I'd hear people complain about, oh, I don't like split screen because of whatever makes it too small, or I don't know.
Yeah. And that was thinking about that, we didn't play a lot of those games on PC like that because most people had like 15-inch monitors,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
It's pretty, even as a kid, like huddling at a desk around a 15-inch monitor was a little much of an ask.
Yep.
But I mean, I had like a 13-inch TV, but it's different, I guess.
Yep. I had a 17-inch monitor. That baby was huge. It weighed about 75 pounds.
Talk about the elephant in the room.
Controllers weren't really super well supported on PCs until like the mid 2000s, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
There was even issues with the PlayStation 3 controllers on Linux when they were still kind of fairly new. Like even the first, I think this one's, I showed it last week, I think, that I modded for the Ubuntu thing. But yeah, these PS3 controllers, I think there was an app called XPatter that's deprecated now. I used it to use, games that didn't have controller support, but you had the basic driver in, and you just map it to keyboard, mouse. Yeah.
Yep. Where there is a will, there is a way, no doubt. That has been the lesson over and over. And as we've talked about, the idea that companies take these intellectual properties. I was just listening to something about PlayStation trying to, I guess, match the Game Pass on Xbox, where they're bringing in their old catalog of games, and I didn't understand all of it, but it's just like this streaming services, Disney Plus pulling back all of their content. It's the same thing where they're trying to, intellectual property rights and like who owns what and how can you get to it, and it becomes really frustrating for people to try to get to just play a game. It's confusing to me because I'm not a big gamer, and so when I look at all the options available, I don't even know where I'd even start. Like it's
Yeah,
it's one of those things that kind of goes back to having hard copies. The Switch, you can have hard copies even though there's updates over the network if you're going to do that. They're one of the, that's like isn't that the only company that really, that's like they design their systems explicitly around that, because it's like, this is a thing. But like you have Xbox and PlayStation where they're like, yeah, okay. It almost feels like they're reluctant to put a disk drive in.
Oh, I remember what it was. So it was basically that you can only stream those games. You couldn't play them locally because they haven't built an emulator that runs on native hardware. So
that was an issue with PS3 games, because PS3 games on PS4 not all of them were forward compatible. I think the developers had to port them at first because the PS3 had a specific kind of hardware chip or something to it. You might know what I'm talking about, Adam, since you have a PS3. What was the deal with that? Because there was something weird. Because I remember the original PS3, you could back compat all of the games.
Yeah, so I understood why the PS4 didn't emulate PS3, because like you have to, even to emulate PS3 on a PC, you gotta have some serious hardware. Like a PS4 is basically a glorified tablet processor on the CPU, and like the GPU is okay, but even for the time, it was kind of low. I mean, the main reason the PS4 and Xbox One specs kind of sucked was because they were coming off of the recession, and there was a lot of economic uncertainty when they were building this system, right? Because it's not like it came out in 2013, they built it in a couple months. Like, it's several years ahead of time, and like there's a lot of other economic reasons why the specs sucked. But the PS4, a lot of games ran in like 720p 30 fps. I couldn't expect that to emulate a PS3, but the PS5, yeah, that should be plenty. But it's a matter of building that technology, right?
Right.
Well, that is a very cool project. It sounds like it solves a lot of problems for you and makes it just that much easier to, because when you have the time to play, you just want to sit and play, right? You don't want to have to like
Yeah,
mess around with everything to get it.
correct.
So that's
And it takes us like a little bit to get it all set up at first, but then after that, it's like, doesn't matter what device you are. It's just like, here we go to my retro NAS, go to this, and there it is, right?
yeah, that's what I mean. Like, that's amazing, and the fact that it helps curate your collection for you and stuff like that. I mean, that all sounds like it would just be, free up that time so you don't have to deal with all that nonsense. So that's great.
I was just looking through the Retro NAS GitHub, and the other features here you didn't mention are like one of the things is it's meant for being put on low power hardware or older hardware, and some of those older systems you can't use hard drives more than 2 terabytes, or if they had only FAT32 compatible stuff or whatever. So
Yeah.
then they also say it's a good like go between if you have two different machines that don't support each other's file systems.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of really cool. They filled a very utilitarian gap in there where it's like you're trying to maybe migrate systems. You don't want to have to go buy adapters and hook things up. It's like you could just keep it there and it just does all of that stuff in the network instead of having to, as long as you have a NIC, you're good. That's cool. I like that Retro NAS.
Great. I'm glad we got to bring it up then. Hopefully some folks will take a look at it and maybe it'll be as successful for them. All right. Well, I haven't done anything particularly interesting with Linux or any kind of technology. I've mainly just been editing videos and stuff like that, so nothing particularly interesting or worthy of discussion, I would say. So I think I'm just going to move on into the news flight portion. And again, the idea being that I'm just trying to solicit conversation. This may or may not be anything that's particularly interesting, so I'm just going to kind of go through them. If we happen upon something great, and we'll go for it. So I stuck some things in here. We've talked about EndeavorOS on last week's main Linux Saloon stream, but I wanted to give folks an opportunity to talk about it here, hoping that we'd have a bigger group. And I'm very appreciative that you guys are here. Thank you so much. I'll also be talking to myself. But anyway, I think we've all sort of talked about some of this stuff already. But anyway, so I know that so Adam and Steve and Vince and I kind of have a sideboard chat throughout the week, and we kind of talk about different Linux things we're doing or whatever. And Vince is an Arch guy, and so he and I have been talking about using Arch, and EndeavorOS is one of those ways that Arch is just not always the easiest thing to install, even though they do include an installer now, and it's not terrible. It's still not a graphical installer, and I think maybe a lot of people expect that nowadays. So that's really where EndeavorOS shines, is providing that experience of a graphical installer, and then also some system tools to make it easier to run your system. And I've always appreciated using it for both of those things, because I like that they basically have encapsulated some of the command line tools that you would be using in Arch to do things like set your mirrors or packages and just different sort of system configuration tools, settings and things like that, and make them graphical, or at least as easy as clicking a button instead of having to know a command. So basically making it a little simpler to run. And anyway, this latest release is the installer itself. They continue each release to iterate and improve on the install experience. In the past, it was, it was the Calamari's installer doesn't do a great job with its progress bar of basically explaining what's going on. So it'll get to certain spots and then sit there, and it's hard sometimes to know, is it hung or is it actually doing something? And so their step was always their solution was to open the log and then do the tail of the log and then watch it sort of refresh as it goes through. And I mean that kind of helped, but it was another extra step. And then in the last release they started doing it automatically. It would just launch that window and have it in the background. Again, to basically let you know that it was still doing something versus is it hung. And then in this release they've gone even further with that and incorporated it directly into the installer, where it will show you what's happening in the log. And so that's nice. It's just yet another thing, another little refinement, not earth shattering, but, again, making life a little bit easier for people to try the system and use it. So, I've been an Endeavor user. I mean, since the first release. And so does any of you guys use Endeavor, or I guess by a larger association, Arch?
I'm on Manjaro. That's about as close as I get to it. I've been on it. I think the end of the summer will be 2 years I've been on it. So my life's been kind of boring, Eric, with distros. I found this and I just settled on it. And, I've got Ubuntu based on my little workstation back there. I had Kubuntu for a while, and then I've got Mint on there now. So I don't do anything quite as exciting as what Adam was describing there, but the most exciting thing I think I've done lately, which Adam I think might know about it because he was in probably one of Steve's shows on a Sunday, was about a month and a half ago, whatever it was. One of my wife's office ladies there had a iMac that was not working. They put it in storage when they moved and got it out. It was a 2012 iMac, and none of them could get it running. And so I was messing with it. She couldn't find the discs, and I thought, do I spend all the time to try to go down the road and try to get Mac OS back on it again and screw it? And I was able to get into their was it reset screens and all that stuff. And I finally I said, what do you really need to use it for? I said, do you need anything specific that would be program specific for Mac? She said, well, no, just for work, because my wife's been running Mint for over 2 years now. And so I said, fine. So you have a problem if I try to put Linux on it? And she said, no, go ahead. So it loaded Mint right up, and it runs fantastic. And truthfully, it's still running with a spinning drive. And I told her, I said, if you ever want it faster, I said, we could put an SSD in that thing and make it run even quicker. And I don't think she set it up for use yet, because they're still trying to settle her office, get her office all straightened out. But I was shocked at how easy it was to install it on that thing, and to have it boot the way it did and everything. It ran exceptionally well for, it was 20.3. So
it's funny, and that's one of the things I think sometimes people complain about, is that the kernel has, drivers for stuff that's, a decade old, and you think, well, why would you do that? And then that's exactly why, because you would boot up a system and not have to load any kernel modules or, I mean, it's built in. And that's the beauty of the Linux kernel, is that, for the most part, except for certain discrete peripherals, you don't need drivers, and so when I order something off of Amazon, like I'm looking at for science projects with my daughter, one of those USB microscopes, if you've ever seen those, where it's just a little handheld, and they're not expensive and it's not a big deal, but I always look, is there Linux support? Has anyone asked the question, does this run on Linux? And for most people, for most devices like that, you read down through the comments and it's like, yep, didn't have to do anything. Actually, it was harder to use on Windows because I had to install the drivers and and it's just like, yeah, that's right. Linux is so easy to use sometimes, especially for hardware. Wasn't always the case, but certainly nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I found, it seems like a lot of the machines that I refurbish or whatever, I'm a little bit less lax than I was with checking now, especially if it's newer stuff. I'll check to see if there's any, any issues or if it's Linux compatible or whatever. But what I've been finding is more times than not, you won't find anything that specifically calls out Linux as being supported, but yet Linux will run and run better, like you said, and try and install, a native system, what would be maybe if it was Windows or whatever. And it seems like there's one thing I did come across a while back on, I think it was an HP laptop for a gentleman that works with my wife. He had an issue where he got viruses all over Windows or whatever. And I think it originated, he had Windows 10 on it, but it originated with, I think, Vista. And I was trying in the worst way to put Linux on it, and it just wouldn't work right. And I think what it came down to is because I was trying to put one of the more modern ones on there, and it's like the light bulb goes off, and it's like, well, every once in a while you got to put a system that's of that era. And I've done that. I actually had two, I think they were Precision desktops from a friend of mine too. One was 15 and one was 18 years old. And I put Linux Lite, I think it was 3.6 or something on them, which was the last one that was supported for those. So the point is sometimes you got to find the distro that'll work with the age of the system, but that hasn't really been too much of a problem. It just seems like every so often you come across that machine that it's just not going to accept anything newer, whether it's 32 or 64-bit. It just seems like I don't know what it is, that it kind of keeps them out.
I ran into that a couple times, and I found every time I ran into a pseudo older system that didn't boot properly, or I had a reboot issue after an update, it was UEFI. A lot of these, most of the newer installs are going to assume UEFI, and so you have to tell it in the installer, or in the not the installer. You have to get the ISO. That's BIOS or legacy. If you go legacy, you can't miss. It'll install on everything, because about everything will accept the legacy.
Well, it depends on the secure boot and whether or not you can disable some of that stuff.
But the older machines didn't really even have those options in some of the BIOS because it wasn't a thing back then.
Right. UEFI wasn't even, exactly.
With that HP, I was able to load the distros on there, but then I would run into a graphics issue. It would get all kinds of wonky, or all of a sudden something else would start glitching, or it would just have a fit. It wouldn't run right. And it just didn't want it on there. So, but I think a lot of it was because, and I do, like Mint is really a good one for doing things like that, because, now you specifically you tell it whether you want to do UEFI install or not on a lot of these distros, but most of them are going to go that way anyway. Like you said, scrap, natively. But I do think that it's something that, even working with this stuff, you don't always think about it, until it's like the magic light bulb goes, like, dummy, it's like, it didn't hit me until it is now. But so I often wonder about that. But I put Windows 10 back on it, and he actually is extremely happy with it. He said it does just what he wants to do, because all he does is he uses it just when he's on his exercise machine and he watches videos or whatever. And so I bought him more time out of something that he was ready to throw away.
It's funny, as enthusiasts, that we have had SSD, solid state drives for, feels like forever at this point, right? I mean, I can't even remember the last time actually my NAS does use spinning disks because it just makes sense. It doesn't have to be like wicked fast performance. And so it just makes sense to use the WD Reds. Anyway, but for a lot of people who either have older computers or have bought cheaper computers, even recently, they'll still have either they'll have those hybrid drives where there's a little bit of, like SSD, and then mostly
NAND flash.
Exactly. So, the types of upgrades I've done for people are as simple as, like you said, as simple as putting a fixed disk in instead of a spinning disk. And like, people can't believe what did you do? And it's like, I literally I took your old drive, I cloned it onto a new drive, put that new drive in, and that's it. Like I didn't do anything else, and that immediately makes such. And we, of course, we know this, and we've known this for years. But I still think it's amazing how far behind people can be with technology because of the adoption curve, and I guess the price curve, and like the fact that companies have stocks of parts, and they're going to build those out, and those hybrid drives are still cheaper than full SSD. Although I'd argue at this point SSDs are pretty cheap, and good ones are pretty cheap. And it's funny because we've now moved past SSD. We're on NVMe, and we're even faster. But even just a simple low performance SSD is still better than a spinning disk. So
Right.
I limped ahead my mother-in-law's it's probably a 12-year-old desktop with an AMD in it. I think it's an Athlon X4 or something like that. And recently the whole thing tanked. And the funny thing is, you know what died first? It's the NIC. The network card died before everything else did. It was the network card. And then like a week later, the whole thing went. I took over a USB, and little antenna. A week later, the whole thing went. I was like, that's kind of weird. But usually it's like you'll have the power supply or the motherboard will go, and it's like cool because the NIC just doesn't make sense. But anyway, yeah,
it does happen though. I've had onboard, the reliability of computer components nowadays is really pretty amazing. It must be the QC processes they have in place or something, because think back 10, 15 years ago. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for a PSU to power supply to just, I'd go through 2 or 3 of them in a single machine. And now I've got machines that are 10 years old or close to it, that same power supply, no issues whatsoever. Memory chips used to go bad all the time. Like, just stuff would break all the time, and needing to troubleshoot hardware was a critical skill for IT. And it feels like anymore, like things are becoming like truly solid state to the extent that stuff just doesn't break like it used to. No, it can. My desktop is sitting in my office on my desk. It has been for a shamefully long time, because I've tried I did all the easy things I know how to do in terms of trying to get it just won't even, nothing will happen. It comes on, the fans spin, and that's it though. No post, no beeps, no error codes, nothing. And so it's just like, okay. And I did all the normal things of, reseating the memory and checking the processor and, just all that stuff, removing pieces, one piece at a time and all that, and normal troubleshooting things. And none of it has worked thus far.
Look up, just for the heck of it, how old is the machine?
It's a Ryzen system. It's not very old. It's only like 3 or 4
I was
years
going to
old.
say, okay, so if that's the one that you built, I remember, because I thought I remember you built one. I was going to say, look up Jay's 2 cents did a video on, I think, a repair on something. I think it was actually that same exact problem. I'm pretty sure it was him.
Oh, okay.
So, or at least search YouTube. I'm sure you're going to come up with something like that. And I can't remember exactly what the issue wound up being, but he did get to the root of it. And where you're concerned, Scrap, I think like with that NIC going, it's possible that there was just something going on the board itself, and it just started, blowing components.
Yeah, that's what I told my mother. I was like, your network card is dead. That's really odd. The rest of it's about to go. Just know that it is.
Right.
But the data's there. I had already transferred it over once. There's a spinning rust disk in there also this is kind of like my base of any kind of refurb I do for a desktop. I'll replace whatever rust dot is about to die or is dying with a solid state and buy a new spinning rust as a secondary, and to say, hey, throw all of your backup stuff over here, copy paste to this folder, and I'll just make a link on the desktop. So that way their computer runs fast. But sometimes, it's just nice having that extra disk there for it. But that's going to be a day. That's going to be a day of whenever she buys a new computer or a laptop or whatever. And then I'll go over and, pull all the stuff out and hook it up to the USB, adapters and copy everything over. And
well, even if she gets a laptop, a lot of these laptops, people, if there's not really a use for a DVD drive anymore for somebody, even if the machine comes with it, you can get, these caddies that you can take the DVD drive out, put the caddy in, change the faceplate, and just put in a secondary drive in them. I still have, spinning drives in here. One of them is only a couple years old, but the other one's back from 2013. And I've got two terabyte SSDs sitting in there that are going to become my new storage drives when I finally tear this apart and kind of rebuild it. I've got a different motherboard I'm going to put on it and stuff. It's like, but I'm like, oh, it's working just fine. Should I really even touch it? But
and you can buy external USB DVD drives if you really need a DVD drive. Just get a USB one or a USB-C one or something.
That's what I did.
Fine.
Yeah.
They're $20.
Yeah, I got one, and they're basically a commodity at this point. They're all the same parts inside. It's just a slightly different case. The one I got has a nice little cord retention where you can tuck it in, and it's junk because if I drop it, it's just going to fall apart, and that's fine because I'm only using it every so often. I don't need. I mean, you can buy ones that are better quality, but I don't need a robust enclosure. I don't need, it's all just commodity stuff. It's like if you buy a tape deck right now, there's only one company, there's one manufacturing plant in China building those tape decks, and it's what goes into everything. So, it may have a different brand on it, but it's the same thing. And that's what I figured out. Like, I just went on Amazon and was like, okay, which one has the most reviews that doesn't look awful and doesn't cost more than the others? And so, and it's fine. It's perfectly fine. I've used it to, rip some CDs, rip some DVDs, perfect. That's all I need it for.
And I
have a small little portable too. And I was going to say, sorry, Scrap. I was going to say,
go ahead.
The thing is, I don't go for the argument of saying, why put a 5.25-inch drive bay in these cases anymore because nobody uses DVDs. Well, that's not the only reason they're used. There's other devices that can go in there. You know yourself how many people have IC docks or whatever, or things like that, or audio controls. You would be a perfect example if So to me, I still think there's a place for them, but this particular, my main machine doesn't have any yet. So I bought the portable. It's a little, slimline thing, and it works fantastic for the handful of times I use it.
And it doesn't have to be. I mean, it doesn't have to have FireWire USB 3. I mean, it's a slow boat to and it is what it is. It's a optical media, right? I mean, but yeah, and I actually put off buying one for a while, and finally my daughter kept bugging me about ripping some. She would borrowed something from the library and was like, I want to keep a copy of it, and so I did. And I finally just got it, and it's and again, Linux plug and play. There's absolutely nothing you need to do. You just plug it into your computer, and that's it. So
that's the perfect segue back to what we're talking about with Endeavor OS. We're talking about an Arch distro that is easy to install and use.
Yep. Like
these other, you have Endeavor, you have you said Joe Manjaro. I was on Garuda for about a month before I came to Fedora, but that's only because Fedora's got the Pipewire developer that's paid by Red Hat to do it. So that's my bag where I'm going to be with audio. But 10, 15 years ago, when I'm spray painting a PS3 controller and putting Ubuntu stickers on it, it was hard to do a lot of these things and find the drivers and compile. And I'm going to tell you, you haven't lived until you've done a blind fix of your graphics stack with Xrandr when you have no screen, but you know why it died, and you can Control Alt F1 or F2 or whatever, and then you just type it in and go, and then you pray that the last time you hit the enter key, you have a screen, and it works. You can do it, but that stuff doesn't exist. I don't remember the last time anyone's ever said it. Oh, I did a blind run through the terminal because my graphics didn't work. Right. So this is a testimony to it does happen if you're doing, things that are kind of off the beaten path now, but this is such a user-friendly experience now where the only thing you need to get past with your fear of messing with your computer, if you're someone on the edge of going to Linux, go get a USB drive and get an extra hard drive, get a cheap off the shelf SSD that you don't care to spend $40-$50 on, and then open your computer up and replace whatever the drive is that has your main operating system on, so you don't hose it if you don't know what you're doing. Put the new one in, close it up, and put that USB drive in there with whatever Linux distribution you figure out to put on it. I really don't care which one it is. A lot of people will say this, that, or the other. find one, burn it to the USB with your Windows or your Apple or whatever, stick it in there and boot the thing and just find out. This stuff isn't rocket science anymore.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I did a video on that, and a long one. It was like over an hour, and it was basically a lot of steps like that, where it was, okay, what is Linux in the 10 minutes, and then what is, how do I try it, and put it on a, the fact that you can run a live system, you can test, you immediately have a smoke test of whether or not it's going to run on your system, because you boot it from the live USB, and then it either works or it doesn't. And if it does work, then great, you can use it like that just to play around with it, to try it out. Or, the next step is, okay, well, now I want to maybe install it a side-by-side alongside something. And that's a completely different set of things you need to do. But it's the nice thing is to try it, just to, boot it up and play around with it is a very low barrier to entry. I mean, you go get something that's going to, write the ISO file to the USB thumb drive. Doesn't have to be a big, USB thumb drives used to be expensive, whenever you're getting to the multi-gigabyte capacity. But now, they're very inexpensive. So you can get an 8 gig. You wouldn't even need 8 gigs. Most distros are under 4.
You could buy it. I use these, I think they're called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. iFind, right? EAFIN or AIN or so. I can't remember the brand, but there's something, they're on Amazon, and I buy them in 10 packs. And you can buy 8 gig, you could buy 32 gig, you could buy 4 gig, you could buy them all like that. And I think the most I've paid, like recently when I bought 32 gig ones, I think I paid maybe $30 something for them for 10.
That's crazy,
and I think gigs I paid $20 something for them, and they work fantastic. They've got lights on them so that when they're running, you could see them in the activity.
Yeah.
And they work good. SSDs, like in 2013, when I built my first, kind of gaming machine after years of not building a machine, a 500 gig SSD was 900 and something, just under $1,000. Now look what you could buy a 500 gig SSD for. $40 something if you go with a silicon power or something like that, and then here's the thing. If you're going to, depending on what you're looking for, if you're all about cost conscious and you're just a daily driver, stuff like that, I put silicon power brand in a lot of machines. I really do like it. They're A55s. If you're looking for something that you're willing to pay a little bit more of a Cadillac price for, that's got a little bit more history to it or whatever, then Samsungs are kind of the way to go, or Crucials. And I've used all different brands, and I tend to have, like in here, I've got Crucials in here. I do have a Samsung still sitting in here that's actually not even connected right now, 500 gig. But the thing is they've all gotten so reliable. Here's the thing about electronics, is I do see, like we see some all dead on arrival, where there's still electronic devices, there's circuit boards, and it's like, it's either going to be hit or miss. You're going to get a good one or you're going to get a bad one, and the majority of the time you're going to get good ones, because these things, that's the thing. It's like, it's not the roll of the dice. It's basically the time when you look at the average of how many bad units you're going to see over, ones that have lasted for, the last 75 years is what they say the life is of these things. It's going to be so minuscule in the bigger picture of it. Nobody wants the scariest part about, I think, having an SSD, and this is where it's probably even more critical for people to do, backups or make sure they copy or keep their data on a separate drive or whatever, is because when they go, like on a spinning disk, that's the one advantage, is usually there's some warning. You either hear, a high pitched whine, or you hear clicking, or you hear something that kind of gives you an indication, or it'll start sputtering. And SSD, if it's gonna go, it's done. It's gone. So is your data. So you have to kind of keep things. That's why I keep multiple backups of my stuff, mirrored or whatever. So, and that's, we've all gotten kind of lazy. And even with this, my operating, I've got to set up exactly like I want now, and that's why I'm keeping the Samsung in there. And I've just been a little bit lazy yet, because I want to, again, take the machine apart and kind of I try to repaste my CPU periodically, things like that. And when I do that, I want to clone onto that Samsung this system the way I have it now, because if it ever dies, at least all I got to do is then just switch over and go to that,
Yeah. And don't forget the SSD plus. right? A SanDisk has been around for a while. They used to just be known for their, their flash drives and their, or not, and the little, the SS or whatever, not the SSD. What are they? The little ones that you put in
Little
your
SSDs you talking about, or
the micro
Yeah.
SSDs, that you go
or
put in your
SD
phone
cards,
and
that kind of thing,
SD cards,
Yeah.
right? You can get with a terabyte SSD from SanDisk and a StarTech USB cable that to hook it up
Mhm.
for $89 on Amazon. That's
Yeah.
worth that. Like, if you've never done it, you should do it. That's
Yeah.
easy. I looked up the just packs of USB drives. You can. This is ridiculous. These Cushion 10-pack 4 gig for
Mhm.
$20.
Yeah.
You could, and if our our Linux friends are out there listening and hanging out in chat somewhere, get on Amazon, buy some of these, take your favorite distro, and just go hand them to people and be like, hey, plug this in your computer and hit reboot and boot from it. Play with it. Tell me what you think.
Yeah.
So to go
It's
on
easy.
To go on something that Joe was talking about with the SSDs, kind of just they just die when they die, right? Like that's actually something like we do focus fair amount. Most people do on like applying updates to their software, right? You want to make sure you got the latest package, latest security stuff. But how often do people maybe run a hardware diagnostic on their machine, right? Like how
Mhm.
often do they check smart data or any kind of like hard disk integrity or memory checking or anything like that? And there could be any number of like problems they have with their machine that could be completely they might think it's this distro or it was this security update or whatever, but it's actually their hardware, right? Like not enough, I don't think enough people look into that often enough. And I have like servers at work, I have IPMI interfaces and stuff, and they'll tell me when things are wrong and all that. But everyday people, like a number of issues could be detected before suddenly it just dies, right?
Well, that's the sad part, Adam, is a lot of the average users, if you don't know, you're not going to think to ask it. You know what I mean?
Correct. But like why don't the systems do more of that, right? Like why don't they kind of when you do updates or like because they'll say they'll check updates for every week or whatever might be like,
Right.
why not also do hardware diagnostics in the background? And like, so when it tells you, hey, you got updates, but also we detected like these issues on your hard drive, or this memory test went wacky, or any number of those things, like
That's true.
often
I'll give you that. That's true. Yeah. You would think that would be something that should be built in, but some tests too are better run through the BIOS itself. But in this case, you're talking about, you could at least get some kind of a sense of what you see. Because I run, I check my hard drive health and things like that on here periodically. But it's kind of like the same argument I've always had with people with these warranties that these OEMs have out there, and they say, if you want to get 3 years, it's $100 something more, we'll have a warranty for 3 years. To me, that's just nothing but pure profit for them, because most 90% of the 99% of the parts probably have longer warranties than 1 year anyway. The implied warranties from the manufacturers, like the power supplies in here that I have, this one I think that I have in here now has a 7-year warranty. They have some as long as 10. Most motherboards, the average warranty, I'm going to say average because the majority of them I've seen are always 3 years. There are some or two. I haven't seen any in a long time. There are only one. And here's the thing about warranties, just like Crucial says, lifetime warranty on the RAM, and they're fantastic with it the way they are. Crucial's been around a long time. Hopefully it'll be around another 100 years. But the point is lifetime warranties are only good as long as the company's around too. So the point is that's why I tell people, if you don't have problems with the machine within the first year, more than likely you're not going to have problems with it. That doesn't mean, right after the warranty's out, it can't die on you or whatever. But the truth of the matter is the money you're spending on that, whatever that extra warranty services, will more than likely pay for a part and then some, that would be able to fix your machine. Because again, with OEMs, who knows what they're getting their parts for? I mean, as far as discounts or pricing or whatever. And so what you buy something for, and if you got a 3 or 4 or 5 or 7-year warranty on it or whatever, that's why when I build something for somebody, the implied warranties are there. And I tell them that. I said, it's not a one, I might do a year on what I've done, because I don't know if somebody's going to open up a machine or play with it or whatever.
Yeah.
And if they mess with what I did, then, that can, it could be a little bit of an issue. But as far as the parts themselves, if it's, because again, if they hook something up wrong or whatever, then it's like, then you're kind of in theory almost voiding stuff. But so you get past that part of it, but from a year standpoint for labor. But when you talk about the implied, stuff, I tell people you've got, 3 years on a power supply or whatever it is. I put the list down there of what their warranties are.
Yeah. And I think if you look at the, the incidence of things failing and then what those things are, as we've said, it's been historically power supplies and then hard drives and, anything with sort of moving parts, and then it sort of goes down the line to, less likely to fail. And in the incidence of those failures, I think over time has gone down with just better QA/QC processes, that can check parts. Yeah. It used to be prohibitively expensive to do that, and they just accepted a certain level of failure rate, and now they've been able to push that down so far that, it's infinitesimal. And
well, here's another thing real quick before it slips my mind. I talked about Jay's 2 cents. He just did a video the other day. A machine came back to him that he built for somebody about a year ago, and they were having video issues. And it seemed like it happened after a Windows update. And he did kind of like, he went down the path of, like you said, pulling all the parts out, like Scrap said, whatever, you go through the typical way of troubleshooting. And in his case, because he has the opportunity of having other cards and things like, it was a 3080 card that was in there, 3080 Ti, I think, or something. He took that card out, put it in another machine, a test bench of his, and it worked. Then he put it back in the machine and it didn't work. So then he tried a 3090 and then he tried a 3060 or whatever. He tried different, and they worked. And the long and short of this, what happened is when Windows did whatever it did, I don't know if Windows was really the root cause of it, but the card needed a firmware update.
Oh my goodness.
When he figured it out, he did whatever he had to do an update on the card, and boom, it worked. But it's something you would never think about.
Right.
And if you don't have, most people are going to have those kind of extra parts laying around to test it. But, right away, you're going to start to blame the motherboard, or you're going to start to blame, other things. And it's not always the case. It's not always as obvious as you think,
And that's another one. That's one of those other use cases. When I started using Linux, it wasn't daily driver. It was utility. And there's so many good utilities that Linux is invaluable for. And many times you'll go searching for these utilities to update firmware for parts and like GPUs or things from, other sources, and you have to download an exe or whatever. On Linux, you boot up a live distro, you just go in, you do whatever the update is, so you can get all the stuff. And then you do a quick search. Okay, what's the utility to update this firmware? And usually there's a command line, a really easy command line for it. And you go, you don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. And I find it a lot of times, if I can't figure out, like, say, even on 3D printing, and I know 3D printing is more in the Linux space than a lot of things are, but it's one of those deals where it works easier because I can grab my Linux system can communicate easier with the 3D printer because it already has the tools built in with the command line. It sees it as a hardware device of some sort. My slicer from Prusa will see the printer. The only thing I have to do that's any different when I want to update the firmware is I have to run the slicer software as administrator and then run the firmware update and then close it and open it back up as a user. Because you don't want to run your software as administrator all the time. But It's one of those, those are the only hiccups you'll run into a lot of times is those kinds of things. And with graphics cards, that's Bitcoin or mining territory, for crypto. So trust me, there's tools for those things. And you're going to jump through hoops on Windows to do that sometimes, unless they have, built-in firmware updates in like your MSI or whatever. You're going to get the official firmwares. But some of these third-party firmware update tools, they can do that too. It's just grab the firmware, point it to your card, hit the button. That's it. And it's there. These are things that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we're talking about. This stuff has come along.
Well, even the motherboards nowadays, all motherboards have a quick flash on there for updating your BIOS too, if you need to. And I often, the first thing people want to do is blame the system. And my wife kind of is a good one for that once in a while when something isn't working. Like even the browser, she'll say, well, I can't get this to open. I said, look up in your, your address bar. You see that little, looks like a little red thing up there. Yeah. Well, click on that. And basically Google had blocked the pop-up. So you had to get your pop-up window. So don't be ready to blame the system right away. And it's the same thing when you start getting dropouts, let's say on your internet, and you start seeing buffering. And the first thing I ask people, I say, have you ever even looked at updating your firmware on your router? Or what is the age of your router? Because as speeds increase, the service provider starts increasing speed, the firmware gets updated only so much. And if it's not their device that they provided to you, like I have my own routers I buy because I buy gaming routers or whatever, so I maintain that. You're not going to know, and eventually they will become deprecated or obsolete for what the speeds are, and they won't be able to keep up, and you're going to get hangs or buffers or whatever. So, it's those sort of things that come down to just education. Even for the average user, you don't have to be somebody that's super techie, with something like that. But you're absolutely right that I've retrieved people's files off of Windows systems that blue screen and then they couldn't get it back, and I bring it up in Linux, bring up a live distro and I pull their files off, and then I just wipe it and reinstall their OS and they're done.
Yeah, and actually the firmware update stuff is a pretty new development in Linux, but it's the FWUPD that's really slick, man. I have a Dell. So if you have a hardware manufacturer or vendor that supports FWUPD, like you can, it supports the motherboard BIOS. It's, the cards, peripherals, sort of all different devices, which is really amazing. And depending on the way that it's implemented on your system, it can be part of like the software updater where it'll tell you, hey, you've got Ubuntu will tell me I've got a new update to my, otherwise I would never know, honestly, because,
well, you really should be updating your BIOS if it's working fine, unless there's some sort of security patch.
That's
or
what
something
most of them
like
have been, though, is a security. So
right.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's not something that you should just willy-nilly, and so you could potentially argue that maybe it's not a great thing that Ubuntu offers that as an update path, but the fact that it's so simple to do compared to like what it used to be of like putting it on a separate disk, or like it's updating BIOS used to be very scary territory. And now for the most part, like it's just super straightforward. Like it's especially with UEFI, I mean, it just puts another boot entry. If you've ever noticed how it operates. So it downloads the update, puts an update in Grub, a boot option in Grub basically, and then in UEFI, and then when the system reboots, it boots into that, and then updates your BIOS, reboots into your Linux install, and it's like, wow, that couldn't have been any easier.
The biggest thing people have to be patient about, though, with that is when the BIOS is being updated, if they've never done it before, don't know. And sometimes you get those, you'll get 2 or 3 reboots, and sometimes there's like almost like a hang in between or whatever. It's like what you were talking about before, where you don't see progress. If they don't see anything happen right away, they want to go start pushing buttons, and they have to realize you got to step back and just let it do its thing. And not saying something can't go wrong, but realistically, if you don't know what to expect, that's why you shouldn't do it, because you can brick your system in a heartbeat.
You can, and also the different vendors do their updates differently. So Dell does theirs as one unified update, so it doesn't have to reboot multiple times.
Yep.
I've had systems where that does, and it does become a little like harrowing. You're like, okay, it's rebooted itself like 3 times now. Like, is this normal? What is it doing now? So I get that, and you do have to be patient and just leave it alone, let it do its thing. But yeah, the Dell ones are actually particularly nice because it is just a single, and it does 5 or 6 different things, steps that it takes. But yeah, I've never had it, at least for this laptop, which is relatively, it's 4 years old now. But the other thing I was going to mention, so with Endeavor, they rewrote their Nvidia install tool. Nvidia drivers have gotten so much better. They were a source of great pain for such a long time, and fortunately Nvidia within recent years has been playing ball. We finally have a native Wayland session that'll run on Nvidia hardware, which is amazing. Nvidia hybrid graphics on like this laptop.
I'm running it right now on the Razer as we speak. All
nice.
of those things.
And the hybrids used to be what a mess that was, because you'd have to install the driver and then some sort of layer to, are you using the discrete GPU or the inbuilt GPU? And, can you switch between them? Can you run? I mean, it was such a pain to deal with. And now for Mint, so I'm on Mint here. I just installed the driver, and like Mint has a built-in tray app now, where it just basically lets you pick what you want, hybrid, or on-demand Intel or Nvidia. And on Arch or on Endeavor, their tool installed, the hybrid graphics, and then I did install Nvidia Prime, I think is what that package is, and it basically then just lets you do Prime Run to launch a program with discrete GPU. So like if I'm doing video editing, something like that, I'll launch the editor, or if I'm doing video encoding using NVENC, I'll launch with discrete.
They have the Optimus manager, I think, on Arch, right?
They've got everything on Arch. If you go to Arch's wiki page about hybrid graphics, they've got like 10 of them listed. Seriously, there's so many different. Yes, there's Bumblebee and Prime, and like there are several different options, and all of them kind of do the same thing, but they do them in slightly different ways. And the easiest one I found is just do that Prime select, because that then lets you NVIDIA Prime, not Prime select, NVIDIA Prime, and then that way you explicitly say, I want this application to run with the dedicated GPU versus the Intel GPU. So, and I've had zero issues with that compared to years ago, not even that long ago, honestly. When I got this laptop, I've had it for coming up on 3 years, and at first, the only thing that would run properly was Ubuntu. I literally couldn't get it to work right with Arch, no matter what I tried, and that is just complete. It's not even an issue anymore, right? So there's another example of like, as we move forward, and then a lot of this depended on Nvidia playing ball, which they finally did. They finally decided to do some work on their Linux drivers. And Nvidia wasn't really a problem if you had a dedicated GPU and that was your only GPU, right? Because you could the only real issues there was Wayland, because Wayland couldn't support Nvidia. So anyway, Scrap, you're doing all this stuff on your laptop, and it's just all working seamlessly for you.
I'm on Fedora I haven't yet been able to figure out how to install or use the switching between, but it seems like it runs really well. The only issues I find, like with Wayland, right now I'm on X11, but I've been running Wayland most of the time. Wayland runs really well. The only thing I find an issue with on Wayland is if I'm running my wireless earbuds while using my Bluetooth controller, and I have all of the pipe wire stuff set with my external, clock rates and all of that. I have everything going. And mind you, this is i7 with 12 threads on the Razer laptop. It's a 2019. So it's not a slouch. But what happens is I have latency issues with the controller playing Rocket League. And you can't have that when you're trying to do aerials, right? I'm trying to fly. I'm trying to make goals. I'm trying to score on dudes. But you can't do that when you have some issues with that. So there's some weird things. And, I'm also doing the pipe wire thing too, where some of that kind of gets weird. X11 runs a little bit smoother, I think, with that, because Wayland, the Wayland session, this is the thing people don't realize about Pipewire, is most of the time we talk about Pipewire with audio, but it was actually written as something to deal with video. And so what they figured out was like, well, if we're gonna deal with video, now we have this syncing issue. And so all of the Pulse Jack stuff got bootstrapped on, and they were like, wait, this became a whole other monster, which is cool. And I don't want to get into all that right now, unless you want to turn me loose later, but that's really awesome stuff. So when I moved to X11, what happens is there's no connection between the X11 session and Pipewire. Pipewire just gets to go do its audio thing, and X11 does the video stuff. So that's how that kind of runs there. But yeah, it's I really enjoy it. The only thing I miss is on the Arch-based distros like Endeavor or Garuda, where I was, that hybrid graphics icon in the tray is right there, and you can click and go wherever you want. I run it right now. I'm running into issues. If I was to play games right now where I've got you guys are over here on my ultra wide and I'm on the internet over here on the laptop. If I go to play games on the laptop with the 144 hertz, it gets all stuttery while I have the other monitor on. So sometimes that's what I found is a commonality with external monitors on laptops. And I don't know if that's an issue with it being a hybrid graphics, if one's trying to handle the other and the CPU is kind of like freaking out in the background somehow or whatever. But that is an issue I haven't figured out how to iron yet. And I really would like to.
I think if you were to switch to full-time dedicated graphics, so like it was only using the Nvidia CPU, you probably wouldn't have that stuttering.
I'm probably in hybrid mode is what you're saying. Though.
Right. It's probably doing one screen in one mode or both screens in one mode, and then the applications are running, the programs are running in a different mode. And it's entirely possible that like it is running some sort of mixed thing. Cause I've seen similar things with external monitors. Like it makes things a little weird, specifically with hybrid, not, external monitors, dual monitors or multiple monitors on a desktop PC. I don't see that. That has never been an issue really. Some people have had issues with scaling and all of that sort of stuff, but that's a different, problem.
Yeah,
but
there definitely are issues with Linux in general. I think Wayland and X both with mixed refresh rates. So if you have one monitor that's like 144 and the other is 60 or something like that, it usually causes issues.
I figured that would pull you out of the woodwork.
And really, only recently Windows has solved that problem. So it's not a unique to Linux thing. It's been a problem for a lot of people. And like I plugged my M1 Mac into a 144 hertz display, and that was an absolute disaster. Like it was so stuttery and just janky. And I just think handling different refresh rates and syncing them up and all that's hard thing to do, I guess.
I will say the other difference between Wayland and X11 I've noticed is if I in Fedora on KDE, you can right click and in the context menu from your desktop, you can go right to display options. The refresh rate is an option to change. You don't have that option in Wayland from there. It's locked. That's one thing I've also noticed. And so maybe I'll try that. I do like that 144 though on Rocket League. It is smooth.
Yeah.
I love it. So I've been just turning off my external monitor when I play.
And, sometimes the simplest solutions, I know it can be frustrating, and you want everything to work properly, but honestly, how hard is it to just pull the plug out of a laptop? And that's just sometimes the easiest thing to do. And like Adam said, this isn't necessarily something that was only a Linux problem, and it's, it's really just recently gotten better on Windows. So it's not unreasonable to just kind of say, look, it is what it is. You could probably spend days of your life trying to figure out how to make it work. But, how about just pulling that cable out?
Or you can, just go buy an external monitor that matches your internal refresh rate.
That helps too, yeah.
I'm looking at that now because this ultra wide, once I've gone to ultra wide, I can't go back. I can't go back to 16:9. It's got to be 21 plus. It's awesome because I have two 4x3 areas to throw windows up, and the multitasking is amazing with that. So I'm just going to give this. It's an LG. It's an IPS. I'm going to give it to my wife so she can do all of her art with it. She can put it on a nice stand. She can turn it vertical or sideways or however she wants. And then I'm going to go buy a 144. I never thought this is one of those weird things. Like I always heard people talk about, man, you got to get overclock your 60 hertz to 75. And I was like, whatever. And I did it. I was like, well, that actually is kind of nice. And then people are all talking about the 144 hertz. I'm like, I'm pretty good right now. And then I got a 144 hertz laptop. I was like, okay, we're going to see. And you know what? I didn't realize I wasn't actually using 144 hertz when I was running the Ubuntu installs, which was weird. And it's a kernel issue. And not issue. I won't say issue. It's something where the Fedora has a little more updated kernel stuff going on in there. And also the Garuda. That's why I stayed on Garuda for a while because I tried to go back to Farron, which is what I was on for a couple of years. I love that. It's such a good polished distro. But then I went over to Garuda. I was like, wait, was I missing something? Because the updated kernel and everything and all of the performance patches and stuff were there and things just ran so buttery. But Arch is one of those things that has its own quirks. And if you're not super power user, or like you don't know exactly what you're doing. Like sometimes I like to mess with my distro and do things. It breaks stuff.
Well,
You break stuff and you learn.
Yeah.
And so, but I went to Fedora now. It's like, it's great.
yeah.
I'm on here. I'm over here. I can use the Wayland stuff and check that out when it's updated. I can use X11 when there's an issue with one and go back to the other. And you just have to, the only issue is like when I log out, it doesn't really log out. I actually have to reboot. There's some weird goofy thing with the log out thing. I don't know what that is, but whatever.
Like a
44
systemd thing or
hertz.
something.
Like there's audio guys. I'm an audio guy, right? You'd think I'd be like, oh yeah, you got to get that high,
Right.
all the things like the high fidelity. I'm a high fidelity, but I want the clock rates there for the latency for utilitarian stuff. But I can physically see the difference between playing Rocket League at 60 and 75 versus 144 hertz and being able to just that split second difference in flicking
like
that.
The difference between 30 frames to 60 frames a second in video, when you're watching a 30 frames video, like it's inherently slower. I mean, even though we only see it at our eyes are only seeing it at a certain refresh rate, there is an inherent fluidity. It's much smoother at 60 frames per second than it is at 30. And, I've noticed that in my own video production, like certain cameras I have only produce 30 frames a second, and they just look like this webcam, this 922 Logitech, like it's 30 frames a second and that's it. But I will use my phone sometimes, and the main camera on the phone is 60 frames a second, and it is noticeably different. Like the camera itself is better. I mean, the sensor's better and all that, but just the frame rate makes a huge difference. It's not unwatchable at 30, but it's definitely there's something inherently more pleasing about it.
Crisp.
Yeah.
I will point out that there are severe diminishing returns with that. So like you can go from 30 to 60, big jump, 60 to 120, fairly sizable jump, 120 to 144, not really a huge jump, but it's there. But then as you get into like the 240 and the 300 hertz and all that, you're not gonna physically notice, like visually notice, but it's a matter of reducing like the frame times.
Doesn't
right?
it make
like,
some people queasy? Like when it gets too high?
I mean, yeah, some people might, yeah.
Linus Tactics did about a year or two ago. He did a comparison, and he had pro gamers on there or whatever. And even when they put them down to a lower refresh rate screen, they bombed.
Yeah.
And I have to thank you, Scrap, because I just did a right click on here, went into my display settings. This is a 165 hertz monitor. It's a Dell. Wow. The one back there is a 155, but Linux only gives you the option for 144. And Manjaro just did a big update yesterday or day before. I think it was yesterday. And they kept coming down. And I noticed all of a sudden I was getting some screen tearing. So I turn around, and one of the things Ryan had done a while back was he did a video on how to go in and put a fix in the config files, right? In the Etsy files or whatever, the X11. And it worked. But then when I went to this, the newer versions or whatever, I think when they did a plasma update or whatever, now it was giving me black screens. It wasn't working. So I had to take that config file out. So what the fix was like, now if I open up if I do a reboot or I shut down and I come back up and I go into the advanced settings and I look at the pipeline, those are unchecked. But yet if I go in as root, they're there. But so I noticed there was some screen tearing yesterday. So I went in, clicked the pipeline, boom, and saved it. And it cleared it. It's fine. So, but to try to save it from Manjaro, unless I come in differently into this, I don't know, maybe it's, to try to come in as a root user differently. I don't know why I can't get it to save in there. It says it's not available to do that when you try to save it. But
probably some kind of permission,
Right. It doesn't give you the option for those permissions. So I know now that if I reboot that I'm gonna have to go in and turn those things on.
Or maybe you need to be part of a group. Anyway, yeah.
I don't know. But the thing is I just right clicked and looked at it now, and it was running at 60 hertz. And that had to be part of the updates because I never changed it.
Did you guys see Steven Anderson's comments?
About his AMD GPU. Yeah.
Any feedback?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with him on the sense that like it would be nice. I know like it's really handy to have the
Adam,
drivers built in. What?
sorry, 1 second. Just for it's really small and maybe people can't read it, so I'm just going to read. So Steven
yeah.
says, I would like a way to update my drivers by going to the web site, like going to AMD website, so I can have a modern driver and easy. I have a 6500 XT and only 3 distros have the driver. My monitor is 165 hertz. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the issue being like you want to run maybe an older, or older I say in quotes, but like a more stable solution, right? That doesn't necessarily have like the newest kernel, but you want your hardware to work. And that's kind of the Achilles heel of having all of the hardware drivers and support built into the kernel, is that you rely on it being the newest kernel. So
Yeah.
I've talked about this before, how having an Nvidia driver that you have to install and all that can be a pain. It can be problematic depending on the distro, but it also gives you the option of having the latest driver on an older kernel.
Yep.
But it always seems silly to me for like AMD and Intel to get a newer driver. You just have to update the core part of the system, right?
Only the most
And it's
important
like,
part of the whole system, right?
Yeah, the entire thing that runs it. Yeah. And it's like just to get a new driver for my graphics card, right? And like it can be good when it's good and awful when it's not, right? And so having that, having the option to go to Nvidia's site or AMD and all that is there, right? And that's how it works on Windows. But then you have like on the Mac where you don't have any third-party drivers. They're all like you just get whatever Apple puts on the operating system, and that means hardware support may not be there, right? And the same thing with Linux. Like if you have an Nvidia card, it's like, well, as long as the kernel headers and stuff and there's no breakages, I guess just grab the latest one, throw it in there, right? But but with AMD and Intel, it's pretty much just upgrade your kernel. And it's like, why? Like
Well, what would be interesting about that though too, Adam, I wonder, is like that's one nice thing that Manjaro has in here, is you can go in there and you can click, like even in the settings, or when there's an update, it'll pop up in the taskbar and you can right click and go into kernels and you can pick whatever's available, or you can stick on the LTS, which I've learned my lesson. I do that. But if you, as far as an NVIDIA driver, you go into the driver manager and you tell it install proprietaries and it'll do it for you. You don't even have to go to like NVIDIA site or whatever and download it. And
but he's talking about an AMD card, which
right. And that was my point. Is I'm just curious if I don't know what he's running for a distro, but I'm wondering if he tried Manjaro, even if he had a different drive to try it on, if he didn't want to give up the other distro, if he could try Manjaro and try going that route and see if maybe something in Manjaro would work differently for him, seeing as it has that option versus having to try to go on a site and see if you can manually download them, because that being in the kernel could be a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the thing is talking about is that only 3 distros have the driver, meaning that only 3 distros that he's tried or something that have the latest kernel that have the driver for his newest AMD card. It's a 6000 series. And so
that's what I'm saying.
But if he wants to run like an Ubuntu LTS, he doesn't want to deal with something like Manjaro Arch or anything like that. He doesn't have any recourse. He has to run something with the latest driver. So it pigeonholes him into running a rolling distro basically to get support for the card that he bought. So that's always been a complaint about, that I know I've had. Like if you buy an AMD card, like say right now we have the 6000, like let's say the 7000 XTs or whatever come out. It's how long is it going to be until your distro gets an update or a new kernel that lets you lets you use the graphics card you just bought? Whereas if I buy an Nvidia card, they release a new driver for it, like pretty much day one, every time they add new cards to their roster. I can install that card, install the driver, day one, I'm running. But AMD and Intel, it's like, whenever the new kernel gets to your distro, or you can just run a rolling distro that you probably didn't want to run in the first place.
And that's it. That you're right. You're right about being pigeonholed or pinned to a rolling release. But if he really wants it that bad, I'm just curious. I would be curious, if nothing else, if he'd be willing to try it just to tell us, because the latest kernel right now that's in the kernel list of Manjaro is 517.1-3.
Yeah,
I mean, running the LTS, the 515 kernel in here, but the point is you've got more options if you really wanted them.
But couldn't that same line of logic be used for telling someone to use Windows instead? Because you're just like, well, if you want your hardware to work, you need to run this rolling distro that you
Yeah,
want to run. And it's like, well, if you want this app to work, I guess you'll just run Windows then. And it's like, it just seems like the kind of poor advice. It's like it's sort of treating the symptom and not the problem, right?
No, he just wrote a comment now. He said Manjaro does have the other driver, but on Manjaro for some reason he can't copy and paste in Manjaro, which I don't understand why that would be. I can copy and paste just fine. So
Yeah,
and
that's a whole
there's a
other
lot of
issue.
help out there. And I get what you're saying, but he said he tried 3 distros. So I'm thinking, okay, if you're willing to try, which he obviously said he has done Manjaro, it would just been another thing for him to try if he really wanted to. And you're right, it's Windows, but if you want to stay on Linux, it's just, I was just trying to throw something out there. So obviously, so when you say, Stephen, when you say cut and paste, what is it that you're having issues with cutting and pasting? Because I don't have that problem.
Don't forget, it's going to take him a little bit of time because of the latency of the stream and all that. So
correct.
Sometimes asking questions takes a little while, but
that's fine.
While we're waiting for him to answer, I wanted to bring up that also Raspberry Pi, so they just call it Raspberry Pi OS now. They bumped the kernel. There was a release. They bumped the kernel from 5.10 to 5.15, which seems like a pretty huge jump. Removes the default Pi user, which I've always thought was a terrible idea. That you have this just, hey, everyone running a Raspberry Pi with Raspbian, what it used to be Raspbian, has what the user is going to be called at least, so let's have fun brute forcing that if it was worth it. And then they also have support for an experimental Wayland backend, which can be enabled from a command line utility. But some pretty big, those are big changes, right? I mean, major jump in the kernel, removing the default user and forcing you to go through that wizard at the beginning, so before you could skip it, and also then having a experimental Wayland backend. That's pretty impressive. So anyway, go ahead,
making
Joey.
it hard to take you seriously with them ears on.
What ears? What are you talking about?
That is proper business attire, sir.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, you could see this in a full suit and tie with the bunny ears, right? I mean,
he just answered. Let's see. Copying and pasting from his downloads to his storage drive does not work. That may be possibly either a permissions issue or what I'm thinking too. Like I actually loaded in here. It's like GNOME disks where I could bring up the disks to see what my disks are doing, and then you actually can go in and tell it what drives are to be mounted or things like that, or change some of the mount settings. Like by default, it won't automatically mount the drives until you click on them, where I like to have them mount automatically. So I turn it off and change settings. He says he thinks it's graphics card related. I don't understand why graphics would be an issue with cutting and pasting downloads though. That doesn't make sense. You guys got any thoughts on that?
It doesn't make sense to me, but I've seen weird hardware issues that do things that you
but I don't understand how that
can be. This specific one, no, I agree.
Yeah, that's file transfers, file issues.
Cutting and pasting instead. I'm just kidding. I'm just being an ass.
Yeah, I mean, cutting and pasting, you could try that too. But it's still the same process or same theory. You're trying to move one file over to something else. And I don't have those issues. The only time I've ever run into that is if you go to look, and this might be what he's experiencing, is you'll go to look and you'll go to open up the storage file that you want, and you'll find the file folder, and you open up, and all of a sudden all the other files that are in there look like they're grayed out a little bit. And that's because the drive's not mounted the way it's supposed to be. And then you got to just change the mounting settings or something, and that takes care of it.
So, sorry, any thoughts on the Raspberry Pi thing since I brought it up? I just want to give you guys a chance to say anything if you wanted to.
I know I've never thought to actually use my Raspberry Pis for desktops, but I'm kind of interested to try that because since my Recal box kind of got replaced with the Shield, I have this open Pi that just sitting here staring at me.
Well, earlier on, someone had said that the initial, so Steven Anderson said $200 for a Pi 4 Model B. He got his Pi 4 Model B 8 gig of RAM after tax, $143. So the cost has gone up with, I suppose, the supply and demand, right? It's just there aren't as many. And so that doesn't necessarily surprise me. I mean, Pis have already sort of gone much higher in price. But I think that's what people want. Like you mentioned running it as a desktop. I think they've used them for lower powered projects, but maybe they're starting to, that line blurs a little bit. I personally don't think I could run a desktop off of it, but
Yeah,
I
probably
mean,
not. I'm just curious to see what it'd be like, right?
it would be perfectly fine to be a thin client, right? I mean, if you were,
Yeah, just remote into something.
yeah, I mean, it would be great for that. Oh, and then they also mentioned that maybe there's news on the Pi 5, which I just don't follow any of this stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm not clued into everything. But
oh, don't lie to me. I know you are. You're holding out on me, man.
No, I know nothing about a Pi 5.
I love the Raspberry Pis. I'm about to turn into a home assistant. They're really great for all kinds of stuff. I was using them for a bass synth when I played live in bands and stuff. There's so many good uses for them, and I can't see why you shouldn't be able to use some of the newer versions of them for for general purpose computing, web browsing, etc.
Yeah, I mean, and you're starting to push those lines. Like, I mean, if you're spending a couple $100 on a Pi, and I mean, you could spend that same money on you're starting to get into like Chromebook territory, or you
Or
could
just
get
a used laptop.
exactly. So I mean, it's kind of you really got to want. There has to be a specific reason for it. But in terms of like the hobbyist aspect or solving, single problems, like it's a single board computer,
Yeah.
and not that it can't do multiple processes, but I have always sort of thought of it in that term. Like if I had, the one Pi that I have is running Pi-hole, and it does that perfectly fine. It probably has enough capacity to do something else, but why bother? Because it's a Pi 2. It's was literally sitting there gathering dust, and so I put Pi-hole on it, and now I just go in there every so often, run updates, and it's fine, So I think sometimes people want to do too much with something, and while they'll claim, like Explaining Computers, the YouTube channel, like that guy's fantastic with all of his single board computer, like the reviews he does and everything, and and he's pretty upfront about the fact that yes, you can do it, but why,
Yeah.
Yeah, there are companies now that are making basically NUC carbon copies of NUCs, and with the Ryzen GPUs that are in them, you're not paying too much more, and especially for the real estate that it's going to take up and all of the. Excuse me, I have children.
okay.
Expectation is
But
the
yeah.
thief of joy.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, I guess if you kind of assume that, it was going to not be a, fast experience, again, it would have to be so specialized for that to be a solution. So,
Yeah.
anyway, the other
What else
thing,
you got for us there, Easter Bunny?
well, I was just going to say the other thing I'm going to mention was, so Linux Mint has always been sort of one of those stalwart distros that, it's the one that, always comes to mind if someone was new to Linux or, wanted a gentle introduction, a very curated experience, if you will. And Mint has always provided that, except that major upgrades so point releases have always been easy to do the updates, but the upgrades between major releases have always been just a complete hassle, to the point where I think a lot of people, myself included, just reinstall, because it's it's so fraught with problems and breakage, and I mean it's just cruft left over. It's almost never a clean experience. So one of the things that they've talked about, so Mint 21 is codenamed Vanessa. It's going to be based on Ubuntu 22.04, which is going to be released here, I think, next week or something. So as part of that, they're going to include a graphical upgrade tool. So you could do the upgrades previously, but it was a lot of in-depth command line type of things, whereas the upgrade tool will provide a graphical and so no command line. It's localized. The existing tool is only in English, so it'll be localized and multilingual. Performs more checks to make sure everything's fine. Things like are you connected to AC power, free space versus download size, list of packages to be removed, etc. It's configurable, even though you really shouldn't skip anything. It allows you to disable some requirements, such as the presence of a time shift snapshot. Preserves your choice of mirrors, It doesn't force you to remove your custom repositories and PPAs, which is always a pain in the butt.
Right.
It warns you, but lets you keep orphan packages, provides and handles solutions for most detected issues, along with the explanations you'll need along with the explanation, you'll just need to click a fix button. That's pretty cool. So if they can pull this off, that's pretty impressive, because that has always been one of the painful things of running Mint, is that you get to that major upgrade point and it's just like, ugh, do I really want to go through all this, and set this up all over again?
I know
not
that
not even just for new people, but just in general, like just make it easier for anybody.
But even when I know if you had to do, let's say, a grub boot because you had something going on and you wanted to do a system check and make sure that you didn't have any broken packages or whatever, you can potentially get a message that says it's not available on this version if you've done an upgrade, and that's always been annoying as guy get. So
yeah, and it's just like Adams makes a very good point. I mean, so this is a distro that we would recommend. I mean, that I would normally recommend to newer users, but I'm using it now because it's just easy.
Yeah.
I just enjoy using it because everything's done, and I don't have to think about much. But it poses a major challenge to do that update, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of skill to know that you're doing the right thing. So this is one of those types of projects that sounds like it makes perfect sense. Of course, why wouldn't you do this? But then once you get into actually implementing like all of the potential things that you could run into, like how do you account for all those things, and like it sounds like a monumental undertaking. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I hope that it works, because that would just make Mint all that much more attractive. But yeah,
well, and like anything else, it may not work perfectly out of the box initially, and it might have a bug here or there. I hope not, but I'm sure and that's exciting to hear, though, if that's what they're going to do. And I trust that they'll get there, even if they did have a couple of glitches here and there. So,
well, the nice thing is that they are a well-funded project. They take it very seriously. They've been around for quite a long time, and they have done a lot of things that make running a Linux desktop simpler, and at least easier. So I have no reason to doubt that they can't pull this off as well. But just I in looking at it, I understand the level of care and attention and detail and thought that has to go into this, because the worst thing they can do is provide the easy way of doing it and then have it not work, or worse, have it kill someone's data or something like that. Like that would be awful, right?
Yeah.
So at a bare minimum, you have to make sure that it doesn't, hurt anything and destroy any kind of data. But anyway, I'll be testing it before I actually do it on a live system. I'll install the previous release and run through upgrading that release in a virtual machine, and but it sounds great. It really does. It sounds like something that's going to solve that has been a consistent complaint about Mint for years. I mean, for a very, very long time.
I've got it on my test laptop here, so I might try it on there first, because my wife's work machine and her work laptop both have 20.3 on there now, and I was thinking, well, maybe I'll just do a fresh install, but it'd be interesting to see how that goes. I would still be a little nervous though if I upgrade it and then she winds up having problems. I just like knowing a clean install's there. But
and that's depending on how you have a system set up, it's not overly difficult to deploy, to reinstall. I mean, if you have depending on like how you have the home folder and the data, if it's cord, if you have kept it, separate, or there absolutely you can back up configurations. There's lots of things you can do, but it's if you have the wherewithal to do it. Whereas this is going to be something that the person who maybe had a friend install it for them, or isn't a very knowledgeable user, this is something that's going to make it supposedly easy for them to do it. And that's what I'm saying. Like you just have to trust that it's going to work.
Yeah, I had put it on a friend's system a while ago, and he wound up upgrading it, not really and God love him for giving it a try. And I've known him since I was 3 years old, and he's got Parkinson's, and my grandson and I built him a machine. I've talked about this before. And he tried doing an upgrade and he wound up working the machine. So he brought it up here, and, and I fixed it for him. But then his most recent thing is because of, again, Parkinson's affects your steadiness and things like that, which, so it's kind of difficult to maneuver things around sometimes. And he somehow, which I know what he did, because it's pretty easy. It's interesting on Linux Mint Mate that the menu is locked, but yet on Cinnamon it's not. And he wound up deleting the menu out of there. And yes, it takes some undertaking to do this long distance with him. I've never really done, access to a machine or remote access to somebody, which I really need to start doing more of that. But so we would just do a live, like on the phone, like a face chat or whatever. And I'd have him just reverse the screen around and I'd walk him through, and he was able to fix it, So it's just interesting that when you have somebody that's got that type of hurdle to go through and they can do it. So that says a lot for the distro itself and the things you can do with them. It was basically just right clicking in the web apps and putting it back up in there. So, the applets. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, the last thing I want to talk about, we have just a few minutes left, but Scrap, you mentioned you're on Fedora. Fedora 36 beta is out, and it's set to be, the full release is set for the end of April, and that includes the workstation, which is GNOME, and then also the spins, which would be all the other desktops. Fedora does a really great job if you've never looked at their spins. So if you don't want, GNOME, and you want anything else, Plasma, Cinnamon, Mate, I mean, they've got, they don't call them flavors, they call them spins, but they have all of them, and they're all very good. Whoever does the sort of default desktop theming and layouts, it's just very clean. It's not overly done. It's pretty true, holds pretty true to the upstream, vision that the desktop environment creators, the developers put forth. They give a very vanilla experience in most of those. And it spins, makes Fedora infinitely, more usable. And apparently they've been making strides towards, accessing the third-party repositories and, codecs and things that have been, Fedora's sort of mantra is that they only want to put out free as in, Libre software, or free as in, free as in free as of encumbered, licenses and stuff like that. So it's always been sort of a challenge to run a general purpose Fedora desktop if you want multimedia codecs, or you want Nvidia drivers, or, stuff like that. And in the latest release, you actually just, you enable it as part of the installation or setup process. And so it makes it that much easier.
I'm curious to see what the upgrade path is like from 35 to 36, because I haven't used Fedora in a long time. And so this will be my first time going from release to release.
I remember going from, I want to say like 32 to 33, something like that. And I don't remember it being particularly painful. It's slow. It takes a long time to sort of go through and read all the packages and sort of do the comparison and all that. So it's not like a quick process, but from what I remember, it was pretty straightforward.
Scrap, did you ever take a look at, from an Ubuntu based standpoint, the new Ubuntu Studio, the KDE now, the 2204 beta? That's really interesting.
I have not looked at that. Last time I tried Studio, I was attempting it because they're the only distro, and I think it's unique to Studio, that they have a tool for setting up your jack pulse bridges. Because you have that triangle that I like to describe it as. You have your ALSA and your pulse and your jack on top of ALSA, and you need to be able to bridge them somehow. And those bridges show up in Pulse when you go to your taskbar as individual IO, like different virtual devices or audio and recording devices. they have a tool to do that without having to go through the command line like I used to have to do and make a script for.
I'm not trying to convince you to get off of Fedora by any means. I'm just, what I was saying is I think it's something that might intrigue you because it really looks nice. I've got it in the virtual machine right now, and it just looks really nice.
Is it? You said it's plasma based now.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting that it is plasma based. They don't use the default plasma theme. It's got sort of a nice deep blue kind of appearance, bluish gray.
Very polished.
Interesting. The only reason I'm on Fedora is because of Pipewire being, like I said before, the maintainer for the Pipewire stuff is a Red Hat employee also. And this is, if you're gonna be somewhere on the bleeding edge, you might as well be where the guys are bleeding, right?
Right.
Like you got to be at the front lines and with the guys that know what they're doing. So that's kind of my realm. And there's not much here. Because here's the thing is, if I'm going over, is Studio still on Jack and Pulse, or are they?
I'm not sure what I think they may have put Pipewire into play. I mean, they have to have had put Pipewire in play. So
I thought they did. Yeah, I didn't look. I haven't looked at it that close. I just loaded it up recently, and I kind of took a quick run around.
Yeah, they're still running.
I'm surprised at how different it looks and how nice, and it runs well, and even in a VM.
Was it 2204?
Yeah, 2204 was a beta. I don't know if and I put this in probably a couple of weeks ago or whenever they came out with it, a week ago, whatever, because they don't release the same time as everybody else anyway. And I just been meaning to kind of look back at it, and I just took a quick tool around it or whatever. But you were the first one that, believe it or not, came in the back of my mind. I was wondering if you would have looked at that. So
jammy jellyfish.
Yeah. I
always liked their naming convention.
Yeah.
I might give it a whirl, but it can be hard pressed to get me to move around with a laptop that has a single drive in it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if they I really think Pipewire is going to be the jam. I think it's going to be the jam.
Well, the first thing everybody said to me when I got on Manjaro, and I don't know, I've got this further away from me, the mic now than I normally used to, and everybody said they could hear it fine. So I don't know what the levels are at, but they had said there was a definite difference in how this sounded. It sounded more radio voice like, or the tones or whatever. Like, I don't know. I used to have it like right up to my face. Now I just put it back a little bit and I adjust I don't know. This is a cheap mic, but anyway, and I know that they have kind of a mix of there's Pipewire and Pulse and they whatever their magic is that they put all together in here to make this work. So
that's one of the neat things about the Arch distros, Manjaro and Garuda. They have I don't really understand how they do it, but they have a way of meshing all of that stuff together. And a lot of it's really not Pulse and Jack or whatever. It's mostly Pipewire being the sauce. The Pipewire is like I said, it's got some wrinkles, but when they get ironed out and we get the proper GUI to do the things we need to do, I highly doubt that Jack and Pulse are going to be able to hold a candle to it at all.
You look at things that, I mean, especially major subsystem things like an audio, your audio subsystem, which is important to everyone.
If it doesn't work, you're going to throw it out the window.
Well, it can be very frustrating whenever you have to deal with issues, whether or not you're doing something, music production or something more involved than just using your computer, but you just expect it to work. The fact that Pipewire went from, concept to, early sort of fleshing it out to Fedora put it into practice, last year late last year, I think for 34 maybe, or 30, or was 35
is now. I'm on 35.
35 was whichever one made it available as a, but the fact that, you look at Wayland, you look at even like System D and like other system, like major components of the system, like some of those things take a very, very long time to get put into place. And it seems like, at least from my perspective, that Pipewire has come in and taken over audio. Like it just has done it, like there's been very little, and it's done it in a way that has seemed to cause very little disruption. Now, again, I was talking to you earlier about maybe some of the more involved setups. Is this, something that could be a problem? But honestly, it sounds like it solves more problems than it would cause. You were talking about being able to have multiple streams and supporting multiple devices and stuff like that. So
This right here in my hand is my Bluetooth earbuds. These Soundcore Pro Liberty Pro 2s. They sound really amazing for listening to music, and some like industry professionals recommend them for their sound quality playback. They actually also support microphone stuff. Now, I don't use them necessarily for the microphone all the time, but sometimes I do. When I turned my camera off earlier, and I took my headphones down, I put my earbud in, and I ran off. Right now, if you guys talk to me, I can hear you in this as well as using my USB interface through these.
Yeah, that's slick.
Wow.
Now, the latency is a little different. These are not pro audio for all of the things, because Bluetooth is one thing when it comes to latency. If you're going to get latency, you're going to go buy like those UHF, frequency, stage monitor stuff, and you're going to have a wire running. You're not going to be running Bluetooth. But when you say right, I hear you right here. There's no difference. I knew what was going on. I went in there, took a leak, flushed toilet. You guys had no idea.
Thank you for sharing
I
that.
come back. Right. Yeah. I'm just saying, like, I can go do that because Pipewire let me. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to blame Pipewire for you using the toilet.
So
anyway,
it's like,
no, I agree. The idea that it just creates, it abstracts all of that in a way. So I mean, I don't think Jack was nearly as difficult as what it was made out to be in at least in most cases. If you took the time to sort of just understand how Jack worked with the inputs and outputs, and it really wasn't that difficult, especially whenever you use something like Carla, where you could kind of just visually map it out and see like, oh,
which is exactly what I just did. And you can tell the difference in the quality of my microphone. Now I'm using this. All I did was unplug from my effects chain for my main mic, and now I'm in my Bluetooth headset.
Yeah,
I want to prove the point live without crashing my system, so that way you guys know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that's so you could do that with Jack, but there were always some sort of there were some issues with the Jack required you to do a lot of configuration on your system, and potentially run a low latency kernel, and like there was a lot of the extra steps that were necessary, and it sounds like maybe that Pipewire has really corrected a lot of or just at least it made that more accessible. The idea that you could do those visual maps and plug things in and out of each other, and it really does open up an entirely different world of using your audio devices and being able to you think of something like Pulse Effects, which was an easy way to kind of put filters in place, simply because there was no really easy way in Pulse Audio to do those filters. You could do them by command lines. There were different things you could do. I could imagine now, and I need to do this for myself, I haven't done it yet, but I can imagine now, like you're saying, with those chains, just being able to stick a compressor in there, or a noise gate, or whatever it is, kind of filter you want to use. You just install the filters and then pick them out, drop them in the canvas, connect them up, and that's it. It's really not difficult, and this just makes it that much easier. So very exciting. So
I use LSP.
Go ahead, Scraff.
I use LSP plugins, LSP-plugins. Yep. You can find it on any distro. It's in every repo out there.
Yep.
They're easy to get, and they're easy to use. They have great interfaces. They sound good. You're hearing them right now.
Yeah.
And Carla is everywhere as well. So if you and you can look up tutorials. It's not audio stuff. When you get into this, isn't difficult. You can look. I don't care what software, what DAW, what digital audio workstation, what software stack is running.
Yeah.
Look up how to use a gate, a parametric EQ, a compressor, and that's really all you need. And then just apply it to whatever interface you're looking at. Everything's labeled the same. It's just in a different place. It's going to look a little different. Yeah. A car is a car. It has a steering wheel, a gas, a brake, and a clutch if you're so inclined.
Right.
So there's that. Not bad.
Excellent. Well, on that note, it's after 5, so we have gone our 2 hours. I think I'm going to go ahead and cut it here. But I want to thank you for joining me today, both in the chat in YouTube. We've had some great interaction there with some of our friends in chat. Thank you for that. And also for you gentlemen for joining me here on Zoom. It would have been pretty awkward sitting here talking to myself, although I guess I would have had to. So anyway, this is our second edition of early edition. We're going to either be doing these bi-weekly or monthly. Not sure yet. and so we'll announce them hopefully with at least like a week's notice. So if we were to do another one at this point, it wouldn't be until the 30th of April, if that would be the next like 2-week increment. If we don't do it then it would be the second week of May, which is hard to believe I'm saying that. But that's the way it's been going lately. So anyway, thank you to everyone again. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed doing these. I'm going to keep running them, and hopefully as time goes on, more people are aware of them and we get a larger turnout. But this was perfectly fine. I'm happy to have had the time with you guys today. I've learned things, which is always my fringe benefit, is to learn things from you guys and go away and try them out for myself. So anyway, that's it. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a wonderful week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. We'll see.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Yes.
Happy Easter, y'all.
And we'll see you soon. All right.